Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to provide you with the experience, strength, and hope of professionals actively working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. The purpose of our show is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a disease with abstinence as the solution. Here, we talk about all things recovery. Most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, and hopefully the message will spread. Hey everyone, Clarissa Kennedy here. On today's episode of the Food Junkies Podcast, we're bringing you the incredible Calley Means. We asked him to be here so he could discuss his viral tweet where he stated that he saw inside the room of Coca-Cola's tactics, which were to ensure that sugar-sweetened beverage taxes failed and that soda was permitted in government-funded nutrition programs. Calley is a whistleblower who's exposing the dirty tactics that Coca-Cola used to rig the system and keep vulnerable populations unhealthy. Calley Means is also the founder of Truemed, a company that enables Americans to buy exercise equipment and healthy food with FSA, HSA dollars. He's also the co-author with his sister, Dr. Calley Means, of an upcoming book on food as medicine. Earlier in his career, he was a consultant for the food and pharma companies. Now he's exposing the practices they use to weaponize our institutions of trust. He's a graduate of Stanford and Harvard Business School. We hope this episode will reaffirm that ultra-processed food and big pharma can't be trusted, and that you really will get to see how, even though we know these things, most people can't stop. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show.
Okay, welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your co-host today, along with Clarissa Kennedy. Today, we talk with food industry whistleblower Calley Means. As a graduate of Stanford and Harvard Business School, Calley worked for many years as consultant for food and pharma companies. Some of his ventures included politically maneuvering soda like Coca-Cola and candies to be included as food and food stamps and attempting to stop soda sugar taxes from being implemented. Calley worked for many years within the food industry until he felt sick at heart. In a 1980-degree turn, he now unabashedly states that Coca-Cola's policies are evil because he quotes, "I saw inside the room." Calley Means will tell us about his journey, hopefully, inside this room, how he got out, and what he saw while he was an insider. And then finally, he gives some suggestions about how to change the system from within. For example, he is now co-founder of Truemed, a company that encourages Americans to buy exercise and health food instead of meds and candy with their tax advantage healthcare accounts. Great. Okay, welcome, Calley.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so thrilled that you're here. So we always like to start with the personal. So if you don't mind, please tell us your journey, how you got into consulting with the food and pharma industry, what your role was, and then your aha moment that made you turn from insider to basically whistleblower.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Georgetown, which is right in Washington, D.C. So one of the few people that was actually born and raised in the swamp, as they call it. And but I really had high hopes as a kid. I was very inspired by working in politics, and that was my dream. As you said, I went out to Stanford, studied economics, political science, with the dream of contributing to politics, and worked on some campaigns. What I learned and didn't quite realize when I was a kid is that when the campaigns are over, inevitably, both on the right and the left, folks go into consulting. And the two biggest spenders in Washington, D.C. are pharma and food. So inevitably, most people, and they go in, and almost everyone I know gets into this game of public policy and politics for the right reasons, but inevitably you find yourself sitting across the table from food and pharma companies. At the time, honestly, I was fine with that. I was kind of conservative, I would say traditional thinker, and felt proud of pharma innovation and agriculture innovation, and was happy to help these people initially. But as time went on, it was pretty dispiriting, and just to kind of bring it to today, it got out of politics, got more and more into entrepreneurship. and have really been convinced in the past several years, looking backwards on my experience, I call it the devil's bargain, the fact that we're getting so sick from food, and then we would expect the healthcare industry to talk about that, to raise the alarm, but it doesn't, because every institution in healthcare, I believe, profits, especially in the United States, from treating people who are sick. And we can dive into that, but I actually really, looking back, did see a lot of this devil's bargain, of this coordination between health and food, and having personal family issues. So my mom dying from a metabolic condition really tied to her prediabetes, which 50% of American adults have, and then my sister, who was the pride of the family, a physician, Stanford med school surgeon, on the right track, and abruptly kind of leaving, based on her insight that almost everything she was doing surgery on was tied to inflammation, which is tied to food, which is not taught in medical school. So a couple personal awakenings, having a new son, going to it's absolutely, I think, terrifying what's happening to kids right now in their metabolic health. So decided to speak out, and Truemed is working to incentivize healthy food and health and exercise, where 95% of the U.S. medical system right now makes money on interventions once people are already sick.
As you're talking about this, it reminds me of when I was myself in medical school, and then even as an academic before that, being aware that, like you said, you go in with the right idea of helping people and wanting to learn things, and then really realizing that you're sitting across the table from big pharma, or wasn't so much big food in my case, but big pharma, and that's who you have to work with. And one of the things, as I was listening to your other talks, was this concept of moral injury. You do something, and like you mentioned the word, you felt demoralized in your work. And I would imagine that your sister is feeling some of that too, which, when we talk about post-traumatic stress, there's a term that's called moral injury. Like, how long can we working in the devil's bargain before we go cleasy?
Yeah, I think it's really, I've been talking and thinking a lot about motivations, and I think that's a lot of what people want to get to, is like, what's motive? If clearly there's something really bad happening. What's it like on the ground? I think it's really interesting with medicine. The U.S., I think it's kind of tragic, because everyone that goes into for the dedication and time it takes to be a doctor, there are easier ways to make money. I mean, I don't think actually people are going into, harm patients and make money, right? The U.S. actually really is a magnet, particularly for the best and brightest. People come here and learn and want to be a doctor. And then the system is kind of dispiriting. It takes these really dedicated, smart people in, it saddles them with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And then I think slowly enters them into this system where, and again, this isn't anything on any personal motivations, but every lever of the healthcare system in the United States makes more money when people are sicker for longer periods of time, and loses money when people are healthy. You take a sick child. I mean, right now in the United States, our program, our healthcare program for lower income folks, Medicaid, we spend more on Medicaid than the Department of Defense, much more. And it's growing at a much faster rate. And that money is really just going to the health industry. It's going from the government to pharma and hospitals. So it's a huge part of their budget, obviously. Again, more than the military department, going just to private industry. And a sick, lower income kid is a boondoggle for them. That's what's driving their profits, because 25% of kids now in the United States have prediabetes or diabetes. That's a gold mine for the medical system from an economic standpoint, because obviously if a child has prediabetes or diabetes, and it, goes into the system, it's told, oh, that's a lifetime issue, and we'll have to manage that. You manage it. You actually have the U.S. guidelines saying that if you're taking your diabetes medication, you can eat whatever you want. So they're continuing to harm their metabolic health. 99% of people with diabetes in the United States have at least one other comorbidity. That's a very profitable patient. They're going to have a lot of other issues.
You could make the argument there that the doctor may just not be politically aware or astute. They may not be aware of how complicit they are in this. But let's talk about the people that we know are complicit, which are the food companies. And that's the piece that we really want to dig your experience. So you were actually in the food company. And the question I want to ask you is, do you think really honestly, tell us, does Coca-Cola, do they know how addictive their food is? Their what you call sugar water and industrial waste. Do they really know how bad that is? Or do they actually believe their own line that it's possibly that you can do this in moderation?
Yeah, let me answer that by connected to doctors.
Okay, sure.
Talk about doctors, actually. And I think most doctors do feel like they're on the front lines fighting, but the suicide rate and burnout rate and depression among doctors is among the highest in professions. I think that actually indicates that there's a knowledge in some degree and that people feel stuck.
Yeah.
And I think that to some degree is happening a bit more in the food industry. But when I was there 10 years ago, I think there was maybe this like slight knowledge. But people do. I mean, food and healthcare is the largest industry in the United States. Agriculture, food is basically the second. I mean, it's systemic. And I do think that a lot of folks make justifications to themselves. What was talked about a lot and sitting around the rooms, and as I talked about, it was very dispiriting. I saw Coke pay off this civil rights group that has done a tremendous things throughout American history. The NAACP, very transactionally saying, here's millions of dollars in the NAACP. They paid them to keep soda on food stamps, which is a program for lower-income Americans, which is just absolutely decimating their populations. Now, in that room, it wasn't like a cartoon, evil people smoking cigars. It was, couched in terms of like Coke is cheap calories. It's a treat, which they're drinking it. People are drinking it every day. It's termed in these good words, and I think I believed it to some degree at the time, and I do think people believe it. From going to Harvard Business School, a lot of my friends, people that wrote their essays about wanting to change the food system, change the healthcare system, they go into pharma and they go into Pepsi and they go into, it's like basically have this normalization. What I would just say is just because something's normalized doesn't mean it's not very wrong. I mean, cigarette companies, Philip Morris in 1980 was one of the 5 largest companies in the world. And, everyone from elite institutions was going in there, and it was, very normal. So I do think things change, but it's normalized because I think it's such an important part of the economy.
And that normalization, thank you for using that word, because that's, we all often get told, I mean, Chrissy, I know you agree with me here, that, we're going over the top, that, we should just accept that it's normal to have treats on Christmas and Halloween and Thanksgiving and blah, 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 blah. But who's making that normal but the food industry? I mean, am I not right about that? That there's an intentional normalization policy. Like, I'd like to talk about some of the tactics that big food uses, presuming that's one of them.
It's that simple. It's again, I don't think an individual in the wheels of how this works really even understands how cataclysmic this is. I think that awareness is probably growing a little bit, but the invisible hand wants these food companies, right, to be cheaper and more addictive. And that leads to not really a radical strategy for public policy, for marketing, for lobbying, to make these foods as normalized as possible. So that was the high-level strategy. So how do we rig institutions of trust to normalize this food? Not paying attention to the fact that we're eating 100 times more sugar than we did 100 years ago, or the fact that really the sugar itself is totally weaponized. A lot of it's, you talked about fructose, which really truly weaponizes the brain to want to eat more.
It's a great word, weaponized. I love it.
Yeah, it's weaponized. The high fructose corn syrup, processed corn syrup and fructose, is just a special weapon. It truly makes, shuts off the satiety signals and makes people want to eat more. Kids, and this is what's in kids' food. And we subsidize it in the United States heavily. I mean, it's actually just crazy. So how do we rig institutions of trust? Very interesting. Coke actually aggressively, and I watched this happen, they target hospitals and schools. There's an all-out campaign, a lot of money, a lot of attention, a lot of public policy work to have Coke vending machines in pediatric wards and in schools. Today, still, the vast majority of high schools in the United States have a vending machine. Sometimes they have not soda, but they have juice and other sugar beverages. And then in pediatric wards, in more than 50% of them still to this day, they have full strength Coke and Pepsi in those wards and in hospital cafeterias. So that's one. Number two, it's actually the medical groups. In 2011, when we were, working on the food stamp issue, right? When you think about the growth of childhood diabetes and diabetes in general, I mean, this was really not that big of a thing in, 1950. This has grown exponentially among adults and children. Diabetes physician, wouldn't see a patient in their career who is a child or a teenager who had full-fledged diabetes. Now, it's like, as I said, 25% of teens have prediabetes or diabetes in the United States. This is an absolute crisis. And it's, if you were to pick one issue, I think it's weaponized sugar in the form of liquid. We didn't really used to ever have that. We didn't have this liquid sugar drinks until about 50, 60 years ago, right? Juice maybe occasionally, but like this is what folks are drinking right now, and it's weaponized. The American Diabetes Association obviously should be at the top of their lungs saying we need to have a national policy to reduce sugar consumption, especially in the form of liquids, particularly with lower income people. Instead, when we were trying to get, and folks were trying to get food stamp spending off of soda, the American Diabetes Association accepted money from Coke. They accepted millions of dollars. The head group in the United States that credentials nutritionists accepted money and actually said it's a good nutritional move to drink small cans of Coke. The American Academy of Pediatrics accepted money from Coke. So actually had direct payments, millions of dollars from Coke and other food companies to medical groups. Not only did that actually, and sometimes by explicit endorsement, literally the American Diabetes Association having a Coke logo on their website. Of course, it buys silence, right? Of course, it basically enables those groups not to tie food to chronic conditions. But then, of course, and again, I think this is really important to point out where the devil's bargain comes in. These groups, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Diabetes Association, you tell me, doctor, but this is my understanding. These are very influential groups, not just for the United States, but around the world of setting the standard of care and agenda. The main funding for these groups is pharmaceutical dollars that are profiting from the metabolic health crisis. Again, going back to the kid I talked about, that kid who's a lifetime patient, if that child learns metabolically healthy habits, learns how to exercise, learns how to cook meals, learns how to eat appropriately, cut ultra-processed foods from their diets, that's a disaster economically for diabetes doctors, for obesity doctors, for really every type of doctor that at this point is dealing with the impacts of metabolic dysfunction. So that's kind of how it works. A couple examples. It's medical groups. It's directly paying hospitals. It's directly paying schools. I've talked about groups of trust like the NAACP and frankly trying to racialize the debate, which I think is very cynical. And then the last I'll just mention real quickly is media organizations. Pharma is the number one spender on news in the United States, on news ads. And I've been talking out about this. I've been on many independent platforms, the leading ones, but it's a blanket coverage of no critical coverage on the mainstream media in the United States because their funding, number one, comes from pharma, and then a top spender is food. Food companies are the number one advertiser for children's programming in the United States, which is not allowed, I believe, in Canada and other. There's more regulation on this. But Viacom, which owns Nickelodeon and Disney and others, actually heavily lobby the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, which regulates advertisements, that food companies are allowed to advertise on their platforms. And if you watch children's networks, it's just an absolute one after another sugary, really drug peddling.
Yeah. Okay. So for people who are listening, that essentially normalizes. It sets the standard of practice for physicians. It sets the standard of practice, or whatever you call it, for education, at what we teach our dietitians and our doctors. So it's almost a dictatorship of education or knowledge about sugar and whatnot. And that would explain why it is that those of us who are fighting against sugar are virtually dismissed or not heard, and sometimes ostracized.
100%. I mean, people need, and I used to do this too, kind of attack a Canadian system on, socialized healthcare, whatever. We have worse than a socialized system. We have a completely and utterly corrupt, kind of oligopoly of corruption.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just an orgy of corruption.
Yeah.
Like it's actually worse than anything imaginable. We have leading groups that should be fighting for kids literally saying we shouldn't be stigmatizing food and stigmatizing sugar, as 25% of kids have prediabetes, 15% of kids have fatty liver disease, 45% of teens are obese or overweight. We have complete obfuscation on why that's happening because our system is built to grow, which is through treating sick kids. Today, the playbook's just being executed perfectly by, the American Academy of Pediatrics was nowhere to be found. They were accepting money from Coke when I was working and they were trying to keep Coke on food stamps. But now there's, now that we're trying to classify obesity as a disease that we have no control over, there's a huge push to medicalize that, to manage that like every other chronic condition. What I think is the biggest blind spot in America right now is has the medicalization siloing of chronic conditions into individual treatable categories, has that not been the greatest disaster, the greatest cataclysm in American medical history. Every condition we siloed and tried to treat has gone up. Heart disease has gone up. Diabetes has gone up. We spent over $1 trillion on diabetes management. It just keeps going up. So we're going to make, just take any condition, cholesterol, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, depression, which we've totally medicalized. Everything's going up as we treat it. So now we think the magic pill is making an injection for obesity and isolating that variable. Now there's a lot of work by food and pharma companies to make that a reality.
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is you're saying that the more we silo or compartmentalize our various conditions, we have the people who are speaking against it, like Christopher, I can't remember his name, the one that writes
Pharma.
about the unifying theory of metabolic disease.
Right.
I mean, there is actually a simple answer. It doesn't need to be separated out like this, but that's exactly what's happening. It's basically the unified versus this split.
Yeah. I think we have an existential threat because in the US particularly, because I literally people, it sounds so hyperbolic. People kind of gloss their eyes at the numbers, but it is 20% of spending in the United States right now. It's growing at an increasing rate. Healthcare in the United States is the largest and fastest growing industry in the country, which is actually astounding, right? The largest and the fastest growing, producing worse outcomes as we spend more money. Yeah. So in 15 years, it's going to be 40% of GDP, and we're going to have a completely non-competitive, fat, infertile, population.
And the other thing that you said was that you kind of just threw these out, but I wanted to pick up on them. Other sort of consequences, you said we're racializing. Can you expand on that thought? And also the whole body positivity movement, which we actually talked about in the Food Junkies podcast, as that's another potential obfuscation, if that's the right word. If you want to address those.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think we need to really be clear on this and just call it out for what it is.
Let's do that.
We're in this bizarre world right now where basically things that we're saying are good for populations are the exact opposite. And what's happening to lower income, particularly communities of colors in the United States, is they're being devastated, but they're being devastated by one thing above any other, and that's nutrition. A lower income American dies more than 10 years younger than a upper income American. I call it the bizarre world strategy because it's saying things that are the exact opposite what is true. So in the United States right now, a lower income American at the 1% percentile dies more than 10 years younger than an American at the top percentile. And that is almost, chiefly because of nutrition. That is because of the, 1 ton of genetic information that's going into people's bodies each year. And there's a huge disparity on that, particularly when we talk about the NAACP or the Hispanic Federation, the leading Hispanic group, which is fighting for that community. A huge issue of inequality is around food, and it's leading to devastation. I mean, you look at the disparities and what's happening to lower income populations and communities of colors around diabetes, fatty liver disease, obesity. This is really when you are struggling with those from an early age, that is really profoundly impacting your life. And it's a huge problem. And then on just a macro budget perspective, that is literally, as I said, we are spending more on these conditions for Medicaid than the defense budget. When you calculate all the health expenditures the government's paying, it's like 6 times more than defense. This is literally what's bankrupting our country. And weirdly, we're funding and subsidizing the poisonous food that's creating these downstream. It's actually like public policy insanity. And what, particularly when you go into the NAACP, what they should be strongly fighting for is a reformed food system. But a lot of these groups, regrettably, are pay to play. And, when I was working 10 years ago, it's like, just create the list. We created a list of them, the Hispanic Federation. In each city, we had African-American pastors. The major pastors often would take money. And, everyone's kind of doing what's right for them. The NAACP, they can maybe go to bed tonight saying, hey, it's keeping people like Coke. But it's like nobody's really looking out for kids. There's not a lobbying organization that's spending billions of dollars to help diabetic kids. So yeah, I think there's that, and then that same type of playbook, which is just like what makes the debate toxic. Okay, calling someone racist. Okay, well the NAACP will play, but okay, now that's happening now with body influence, and body positivity, as you said.
Yeah, can you elaborate a bit more for our listeners we're talking about?
Yeah, it's the exact same playbook. So 10 years ago, we went to the NAACP. Here's millions of dollars. Call opponents racist. Now, you actually just had reported that Nestle and other processed food companies have funneled millions of dollars. They have a program where they are funneling a lot of money to body positive TikTok influencers. So what's happening is, I'll give a specific case. Nestle paid a leading body positive influencer on TikTok, and they did videos saying that it is racist to stigmatize any food, that the only reason you should say any bad thing about a donut is if that donut has mold on it, and that you can be healthy at any size, and it's systemic racism to criticize any food.
But explain why. I'm so baffled. Why would that be considered racist?
What they argue is that...
Yeah, what's their argument?
I mean, it's hard to even track what the arguments are, but what they sometimes argue is that African-American populations have higher rates of obesity, so stigmatizing obesity and food is actually racist to them, when in fact it's Orwellian, because we agree that it's a huge problem and inequality that there's higher rates of obesity and chronic disease among lower income populations.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's a problem, but their solution to that is just being okay with it and not acting like obesity isn't a blaring example that person's life is going to be shorter.
I get that, but I don't get how calling a donut a problem is racist. Is it because lower income people are eating donuts? And
I think it's very patronizing if you really chase the logic. I think they're saying the communities they're speaking for like donuts and, happen to be fat and obese, and that you're kind of stigmatizing them if you say that.
Right.
I mean, it's truly kind of hard to even track the logic.
But it's trying to stop the conversation, right? Just by saying it's racist, then everyone just stops and steps back, because that's like the worst thing you can be called.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, or that you're fat phobic. Okay.
Exactly. And then it's healthy at any size, fat. So it's tying to, fat phobic, healthy at any size, to throwing in some racial innuendo on there. Interesting. And this is actually like hard to believe. It's hard for me to wrap my head around what the arguments are. And this will sound fake that this actually happened, but the unprompted, we don't even know why, but the largest school district in the United States, the LA Unified School District, shared that video I just mentioned on their Instagram page. There's a lot of tying up. I mean, the schools in the United States are one of the largest servers of food. They're highly tied with food companies. So they actually posted that when they're dealing with a lower income population who's being devastated by metabolic dysfunction. So you have money, just as they went to the civil rights groups, and still are, by the way. The maker of Ozempic, the obesity drug, is funneling a lot of money to the NAACP as well. And the NAACP is literally putting out talking points saying you can address systemic racism by supporting Medicaid, Medicare funding for Ozempic, for obesity, and that's a way to actually be part of an anti-racist agenda. So they're funneling money to the NAACP, and the food companies are totally weaponizing this fat phobic thing. Just last thing, there's also been a lot of money from processed food companies to TikTok influencers, and there's a big campaign in the US right now to scare doctors from weighing patients or talking about weight.
Yes, so, I know that on my side. I see that. Right. I absolutely see what you're talking about.
But this isn't organic. It's actually not that complicated. But it's like, these PR executives sit around the conference room. Okay, there's all these body positive people. They're looking for money, right? I think it would take days to try to understand all the psychology and all the dynamics here, but that's what exists. They're looking for money. So funding them, right, and getting them to carry the message, and getting to carry this systematic effort. So now this is a big issue. Like doctors aren't weighing patients anymore. No. And I just want to be we just got to be very clear. And getting back to your point about
can I tell you why I'm told not to weigh patients? And then I want you to carry on. I'm told don't weigh patients because they keep losing the weight and gaining it back, and we fat shame them so they won't come back and they won't tell us. So let's not even go there because we don't want to shame them. Please carry on.
Which is disparity, and this gets to the dietary interventions fail. Well, they're failing because there's trillions of dollars of incentives against the patients.
Exactly.
It doesn't change. I don't blame the patients. I don't blame. I've actually been a big personal responsibility guy. I really do think when you have 80% of the American adults overweight or obese, I don't think actually the American people have become systematically lazier in the past 50 years. I don't think they're systematically trying to kill themselves and they're playing with their grandkids. I think there's really something wrong here. And I think it's very convenient for folks who are profiting off treating these conditions to say, patients are lazy. These things always fail. it's really,
but anyway, we're sitting around the table trying to figure out now. Please carry on with your story.
Oh no. Yeah, I think it ties to what you said earlier, which I believe is the most important trend in the world in medicine over the next 10 years, is that we have been lied to about this siloed view of health. And it's been extremely profitable for food companies and for healthcare companies. A doctor right now, graduating med school, chooses between 42 specialties. We've siloed the human body into 42 different parts. Mm-hmm. My sister was a head and neck surgeon, right, focused on 3 millimeters of the face, and then do a fellowship, and it's 1 millimeter. And the president of Stanford Med School had an extra fellowship and focused on like 1/2 millimeter, like Miner's. I think it's called Miner's disease or something. He had that's how you rise up. You literally focus smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
And the generalists, the family doctors they're leaving in droves because they're not getting paid and they're not getting acknowledged. Yeah,
exactly. So it's all about segmentation. And that's what's happening with obesity. And I think this is one of the biggest fights and most important fights that we have right now, because obesity is a symptom, I believe, of metabolic dysfunction. Okay. It's not the disease in and of itself to treat. I think we've been totally gaslighted, to see each symptom as like, oh, take a pill, take a pill. It's like, to me, in some ways, obesity is one of the good symptoms. You could be exerting and demonstrating metabolic dysfunction invisibly, like fatty liver disease or cancer or some other way where, you don't even know. Obesity actually is a visible sign. Literally, obesity is the visual result of metabolic dysfunction. It's your cells malfunctioning and too much energy being stored as fat because your cells aren't functioning correctly. We should just be clear-headed in that. We shouldn't be shaming anyone. This is obviously a systematic failure in our country in the way we've done our food system. Again, it's not even that everything's been terrible. I mean, we've had a lot of success in the last 100 years. We've had a lot of innovation. We've had, some food innovation really attacked hunger. But the way we've shifted to the ultra-processed diet, we've lost our way. And just the inability to analyze that's clearly what's going on. And just even acknowledge the fact that if we had a policy to limit ultra-processed foods, particularly for lower-income populations, you would wipe out type 2 diabetes and heart disease. And you go down the list of the top 10 goes Americans, you literally, it's not hyperbolic. You would actually, there's a way to wipe those out. Many forms of cancer. So the siloing really helps. And what's happening, again, folks sitting in the office, it's paying people to kind of obfuscate that, silo things into kind of finite conditions, actually, I think, deprive patients of understanding of the interconnectedness and awe for their body and how things are connected in a metabolic sense. I don't think most people even understand that, but that's what the goal is to segment things and confuse.
Wow. Okay. So do you have any other examples? So you've talked about normalization. Yeah. You've talked about the standardization of care, the silo. I was actually, I don't know if it's already old news, but it isn't to us Canadians who are listening. But, the whole idea that your role of when you were in that business of using food stamps and calling junk food actual food. I mean, that's a bit like, what was it that they were saying for a while ago, like French fries and ketchup were
vegetables.
Yeah.
Ketchup was a vegetable. Yeah.
Is that sort of stuff still happening?
Oh yeah. Oh, U.S. the largest school district, as I said, is talking about how it's racist, stigmatized food. They're feeding kids almost predominantly ultra processed crap. Going to the food stamps thing, I think another important thing to mention is research. So there, in between 2020 and 2022, there, according to PubMed, have been about 50,000 peer-reviewed, academic papers concerning nutrition. There's billions of dollars spent on nutrition, from Harvard to Tufts to Yale. To all the elite institutions, huge departments. It's a growth industry. And food companies spend 11 times more on that than the National Institute of Health.
That's our nutritionists and our dietitians that you're talking about. Right?
Exactly. The foundational studies that really guide, I think, in the US and around the world, like nutrition. And the 50,000, right? So the 50,000 just in 2 years or so. The goal of the billions of funding that food companies give to nutrition research is the fact that there's so much nutrition studies, because the fact that there's a study that contradicts any other study is the point, because it makes everything confusing.
Right.
So you have also just massive conflicts of interest of obesity researchers and nutrition researchers, where they are able to take direct payments from food companies, and often do.
So let me just ask this: Is this why it is that somebody who's saying, "What should I eat?" They go to the keto community, they go to the plant-based community, they go, "I don't know which is it cholesterol? Will cholesterol kill me? Will it not?"
Right.
Like, is that what you're talking about? Because it's really confusing to the consumer.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole scare about red meat and certain kinds of fats, and then the push on more carb-heavy diet was, I mean, that's come out. That there's been research into that. It was absolutely the corrupt process, knowing fraud on those studies. They used the Sugar Research Council directly funded studies at Harvard saying sugar didn't cause obesity, which was knowingly false. In the 90s, and a campaign to brand red meat and certain fats that we know actually are anti-inflammatory is bad. So yeah, it's 100%. And what they do now is that there's still literally peer-reviewed research coming out from elite academic institutions saying sugar doesn't cause obesity. There's basically studies questioning every which thing, and that leads, whenever you go to a nutrition panel or nutrition conference, you have on that stage, and this is said, I'm hearing reports from everywhere, the buzzword is, let's not stigmatize any particular food. That's the buzzword. And it just kind of gives this, this study says that, this study says that. I mean, the head of the Tufts Medical School just did this big, study saying that Lucky Charms were healthier than beef. I actually he called me because we are trying to, it's not personal, but I know from experience that when processed food companies pay millions of dollars for that study and make personal payments to himself, the lead author, that they're trying to get something, what they're trying to get. And it actually said this in the press release for this study, again, that said Honey Nut Cheerios are better than eggs, right? It actually said that the point of the study was to impact childhood marketing guidelines for childhood nutrition. So you take that study, and it says that Lucky Charms are better than eggs, that goes to schools. It's like, oh, look, you can just get Lucky Charms. And we called that out, and Joe Rogan started talking about it. Fox News, other outlets kind of started getting outraged, I think rightly.
Yes.
So the author called me, and he spent 15 minutes basically saying that Lucky Charms are only magically delicious, they're also healthy. And that a highly processed grain that takes out the fiber, but then puts kind of frankenfood vitamins in, that's just as good as quinoa, that's just as good as a whole grain. And that's the kind of, and he was earnest, and I do think he has good motivations, but, I think when you accept millions of dollars personally, and your entity that employs hundreds of people, is dependent on food, that leads, serious academics who, have devoted a lot of their life to, I think, doing good things, to sit on panels at Davos and say Lucky Charms are as good as better than beef.
Right. Until they have...
And that impacts our guidelines.
Right. Yes. Until they have a crisis of faith like you did and turned around, but not enough of them are happening. It's not enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest lie, most consequential lie we face, but definitely I think the most important lie in healthcare is that it's complicated. That's my opinion. And I know you, Doctor, have been, in this fight a lot, and it's please check me on this. And I know the long tail is very complicated, but at the highest level, a lot of what we're facing is tied to metabolic dysfunction. And I think there's a lot of avenues you can go into. You talk about plant-based, talk about keto, talk about carnivore. But if you have the right articulation of any of these dietary philosophies, it gets to whole food. It gets to figuring out what micronutrients the body needs. And you can get there in a lot of ways, but any of those dietary philosophies that isn't basically stressing, they're essentially stressing the same thing, or else they're charlatan, but they're essentially, even these social media influencers that are fighting with each other, I follow like Carnivore MD and then a vegan influencer. They're actually saying 95% the same thing. They're saying,
absolutely. We found that ourselves. Yeah, we found that ourselves. That's the common ground. But we end up fighting about the stupid thing are not related to the thing that we're actually talking about, which is real food.
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple dynamics there. So on the social media and on the influencer, people need something to put their hat on. They need something to differentiate themselves. Yeah. So like attacking vegans or attacking, there's like a kind of it's an incentive, unfortunately, just given, I think a lot of these influencers, podcasts, are actually doing a lot of good things, but they need kind of an angle. So that does confuse people more. I think the much more important part of this is that there's so much research. Again, it's like, do we need research to say that Lucky Charms is frankenfood? No. That versus quinoa, quinoa or versus a whole grain. It's like the fact that we're even debating this is kind of part of the problem. It's like, I don't know about this. There's a peer review. It's like, no, we've totally lost our way. Yeah. The basis of our diet is seed oils. That's an industrial byproduct created by Rockefeller as an industrial byproduct for his oil, basically.
And you call it industrial wastes.
It's industrial waste. It is. It literally is. It was created as a kind of a byproduct of Rockefeller in the early 1900s. It didn't exist before then. We're not evolutionarily made to eat that. It's the main source of U.S. fats right now. And then highly processed grains, which were also created after 1900, stripping the fiber out, just total frankenfood, limited nutritional value, glucose bomb without the fiber. And then added sugar, which really wasn't a thing up until very recently. We got sugar out of food. But so, to me, in a way, it is simple. It's like cut ultra processed foods. If you cut those three ingredients, if we had a national effort to cut those three ingredients, seed oils, highly processed grains, added sugar, I can't even fathom what that would do to our budget and our human capital. And the fact that we have 50,000, industry-funded nutrition studies we're all arguing about, really, I think is part of the problem. I would argue actually to cancel all nutrition research and make the entire U.S. nutrition policy. How can we price in the externalities of the devastation that those three ingredients are causing and work? Not to, I don't want to ban sugar. I don't want to ban alcohol. I'm libertarian. Let's let drugs, but I don't think we should be subsidizing marijuana for kids or alcohol for kids. We're subsidizing it. We're not speaking clearly. The USDA still to this day for 2-year-olds says it's okay for 10% of their diet to be added sugar. It's crazy. That's to me actually very analogous to saying and a recommendation for kids on alcohol or another type of drug. This is a very harmful addictive drug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually you're kind of getting into the next topic, which is solutions. How can we get out of this mess? So can you give us some solutions or your ideas? Well, besides, let's stop all the debate and just get to the three dangers: added sugar, highly processed grains, and highly processed oils or fats.
Absolutely.
Number one, based on that. Okay.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
What else?
Yeah. I think great. I think that there are actually, I could start high level, like public policy and get into personal.
Yeah. And finally, what we can do individually, for sure.
Yeah. So I think there's a big transition in my thinking here. I used to be, kind of getting into this a little bit depressed. It is kind of depressing. I'm actually very optimistic. There are actually extremely simple things we can do that will profoundly change the trajectory of this. Number one is going back to those USDA recommendations on added sugar. I think a very important point is that people, particularly Americans, listen to medical professionals and medical guidelines. When the Surgeon General in the 1980s said smoking was very bad and issued a report, smoking rates plummeted since then. Now, they were late. Now, we knew this in the 1960s, but tobacco was culturally very important. The cigarettes, it was 7% of U.S. tax revenue is tobacco taxes. A very, so it took 20 years too late. But when that report came out, smoking rates did plummet. You look at the food pyramid in the U.S. in the 1990s, disastrously saying that we should eat less kind of healthy fats and more carbs. Our diet in America in the next 10 years, 20% of it shifted to carbs and sugar. So we actually listened to that. And then, even with COVID, telling Americans to take the vaccine, there's obviously been a lot of controversy around that, but I think it's close to 90% plus of Americans, had at least one. It's like we do listen to medical professionals. And if one simple thing happened that could happen tomorrow, which is the USDA, which sets the nutritional guidelines for Americans and basically lobbies the rest of the world to adopt the similar things, said we do not recommend sugar. Not that we ban sugar, but that we don't recommend. The fact that the USDA, the fact that the government says it is okay and frankly encouraged for a 2-year-old to have added sugar is crazy. That's first of all, the 10%, that's a joke. This is a highly addictive drug. That's literally, the dopamine, you're just talking to Dr. Mark Hyman about this.
Yes.
If you do a brain imaging scan of the dopamine centers of the brain, it's actually indistinguishable from other drugs that are very illicit. So you don't give recommendations for highly addictive drugs. You say, okay, we'll legalize them as a society, but we're not like giving a recommendation. Actually, as part of public policy, we shouldn't be nutritionally encouraging this at all. And once you make the USDA guidelines zero, which it should absolutely be, and if you poll the American people, 90% would say, let's do that, then that bleeds into where we're really committing atrocities. Then it would be more indefensible to have food stamp, a nutritional program that 50% of lower income Americans depend on, which 70% right now goes to highly processed foods, 10% alone goes to sugary drinks.
Right.
It would make it unimpeachable to not to have that at the USDA guidelines, which should be nonpartisan. It's supposed to be, but it's not. Said zero. It would go into childhood lunches. Childhood lunches would have to follow the USDA guidelines. Prisons, hospitals. We actually like that would make a huge difference. And it would basically be a guide for policy. I mean, I'm speaking to a number of lawmakers right now who are very upset about this and see their kids facing a lot of issues. They don't even know, they're not thinking about that. They don't have nutrition backgrounds. The guidance should be zero. So that's number one. Yeah. Just one other quick one is I think the Ozempic battle is big.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because it's so big in my community. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm pretty libertarian. If wealthy folks want
the main treatment for obesity right now.
Exactly. I'm not even against the drug existing. I actually think it's going to be recalled as a disaster. It decreases bone mass. It increases thyroid cancer. It's actually just on the merits. I think it's actually a complete disaster and going to be recalled. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. But I'm pretty libertarian. Like I have friends paying out of pocket, taking it, trying to lose weight. It's fine. Okay, great. The problem here, the big fight, is the government funding, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And here's our big issue. This is 80% of American adults that is the market. And then once it's approved for government funding, the government right now in the US can't legislate what doctor prescribes it. So there's a huge incentive for every doctor to prescribe it if the government's going to pay for it. And it's a lifetime drug.
Yes.
So it's like, this is great.
Yes.
The estimates conservatively is that this one drug will double the amount that the U.S. government spends on drug. It will be equal to the entire amount of all drug spending that the U.S. government does. It will impact the budget trillions of dollars because in the U.S., the government can't impact drug prices. So right now,
just for people who don't know, it's like $2,000 a month.
Right. Right. And you would think that if you prescribe it to 40% of the U.S. population, that price would come down. That's not what happens.
No, it didn't happen with the AIDS crisis.
No. The U.S., you're not allowed to negotiate the prices. So it's kind of this, it's like, oh, that can't possibly be trillions of dollars, $1 trillion. The cost will come down. No, that is not, there's no evidence that that's ever happened. The price that it is right now is what the government will pay. That's a key thing for understand. So let's take that. $2,000. We are on the precipice of the U.S. government spending $2,000 per patient. Think about what you could do with that $2,000 when the issue is food and metabolic habit related metabolic dysfunction. Right. You could give every single obese child, a card to literally buy whatever they want, organic food. They could go buy caviar at Whole Foods and it would be cheaper.
Right.
Okay. You can also pay
and healthier.
Right. She could get that $1,000 per person to buy caviar and other organic food at Whole Foods, and then another $1,000, $12,000 a year to exercise. And if their activity tracker shows that they moved 150 minutes a week, they get $1,000 a month. That would be cheaper because it would also lower other metabolic conditions. So it's like if an alien came to Earth and said everyone's dealing with food-related metabolic dysfunction can be reversed almost immediately with food interventions and lifestyle interventions, we wouldn't say give them all Ozempic. So it's like it's a huge deal. And I really think it's just we're going more and more to the path of being like that movie WALL-E where we're all just rolling around in carts. Because of course, Ozempic isn't going to solve obesity long term.
No.
You literally have to stay on it for life. And if you go off of it, you gain more weight back. It causes
exactly. Not only that, And also, we don't even know, is there going to become a point where a person develops a tolerance and so that they'll have to increase their meds or be on a triple cocktail
of course.
Because that's what's happened with all every medication has a lifespan, and then you need to double it or triple it.
Yeah, only the experience in every other drug ever would suggest that. Of course, the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending this lifetime treatment for children when there's been zero long-term studies. Actually, the study they based that recommendation on, this sounds comical. It's like hard. It was like a 3-month study. It was like months. And this is a lifetime. Yeah.
So your suggestion about this alternative, give the $1,000 or $2,000 in a different way, that's essentially your Truemed company.
It is. And this gets to another solution. But just kind of zeroing into that.
Okay.
I think in the U.S., there's a big apprehension of legislators to legislate health decisions between the doctor and the patient. It was a huge kind of issue around Obamacare. It was like, Dr. Obama is going to legislate I just want to be very clear to legislators. I'm actually meeting with a couple later this week. There should be a law that no government money goes to Ozempic before it goes to food. I mean, period. We should have the medical systems have been co-opted and are telling us that obesity is an Ozempic deficiency. And they're literally saying that.
I can't believe it. Obesity
That's what they're arguing.
Oh my God.
So we should, if the medical system is going to be completely co-opted and say obesity is a Ozempic deficiency, then I think legislators who are overseeing the crippling of the American budget and the decimation of American human capital need to actually step up a little bit there and actually do what the medical community has not done. Complete another moral cowardice. Okay. I hope the message, because I'm very despondent as I kind of thought about this in years past. I am very optimistic now. The fact that we've been having this conversation, there's a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, a lot of people waking up, a lot of lawmakers from both sides, kind of amped up about this. Okay, so we got to answer the fundamental question: how do we shift the incentives of healthcare to not wait for someone to get sick and then profit pharma and the healthcare system? Once you get sick, to manage the condition and not train people how to have better metabolic food habits. How do we incentivize people to be healthy? And if you just think about it from the highest level, the $4 trillion that we spend on healthcare, we could blue sky ask, how do we keep people healthy, which inevitably goes to improving our food system. We could have a national effort on regenerative agriculture and better food, reducing monocropping, actually pricing any externality of added sugar, all that stuff. Okay, so a partner and I asked, what can we do right now? Yeah. And in the United States, there's these tax advantage accounts called FSA, HSA accounts. So let me explain what these are. So in the U.S., and Pharma basically lobbied for this as part of the Affordable Care Act, and a little bit before that for the FSA. We don't need to get into the nitty-gritty. They said, okay, we have health insurance, but let's create these accounts where Americans can actually take money pre-tax from their paycheck into a savings account, and then use that money on qualified medical purchases, which basically, the way the law is written and thought of is drugs. So it's like, so most Americans, they can elect to have $7,200 per family. So that's pre-income tax. So that's like 30-40%, depending on your tax rate. So it's a pretty substantial savings.
Yeah.
But usually that's for if you have a chronic condition, if you need to buy your insulin, you can buy it tax-free. Of course, the law, even though every law in the United States on healthcare is written by Pharma, it can't say you can only buy, Pfizer pills or injections. It says a qualified medical expense that a doctor says is appropriate. So a doctor says insulin, you can buy insulin. What we've found is that a doctor can also write a letter of medical necessity, a recommendation for food. Take any chronic condition from obesity to diabetes to heart disease to depression to anything. 150 minutes of exercise per week for 3 months straight clinically has been shown to reduce depression more than an SSRI.
Pay for that. You could use the money to pay for that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we're doing. So we're creating doctor's notes in a very seamless way online, and then connecting those patients with brands, with supplements, with exercise, with food. We're working with a number of food retailers to buy whole food, to buy exercise,
and it's not medical. It's not just going to be onshore, which is just basically just fat and sugar. This is the stuff that we give people for food, who basically,
terrible.
It's going to be real food.
We will have no process, nothing obviously with sugar, seed oils, or highly processed grains.
Yeah.
No, but if you put at keto for PCOS, which many women are struggling with right now.
Yeah.
The most impactful intervention, many studies show this, is a super low sugar keto diet. Has shown extraordinary effects for depression, obviously for heart disease and diabetes reversal and prevention. So we just basically substantiate in the know, our physicians, things that should be pretty obvious to us, but aren't to the system, which then unlock medical spending on food and exercise. So Truemed.com.
Yeah. Calley, we're running out of time, and I want to ask one more question about two more. What about another intervention of, can we sue the food companies? Do you see that eventually happening, like we've done with the narcotic, the Purdue company?
The Purdue and the cigarettes, yeah. No, I think the only thing that's different. I'm sorry.
Oh, is that something that we can do eventually in the future?
Yeah. So it's been very enlightening being on this rampage in the past couple of months talking about these issues. A number of prominent lawyers have reached out, and just there's efforts underway. I've been trying to connect them to researchers and other folks as best I can. Bill Ackman, one of the richest people in the country, a hedge fund manager, retweeted what I wrote about Coke and said it's time for a class action. He suggested he wanted to fund it. Lawyers are working on this. So yeah, the only thing that is different, frankly, between sugar and opioids or tobacco is that what sugar is doing is worse. It's far worse. I mapped out on Twitter you could tie the deaths to of each drug. Sugar is an order of magnitude worse than any other drug, including opioids. Interestingly, all the drugs that kill the most people are at the top of the list, and at the top of the list are legal. It's like sugar, opioids, methamphetamines, which we prescribe to 15% of U.S. high schoolers, on down. And then it's a whole nother conversation, but you have, MDMA and psilocybin and stuff that, basically killed nobody. That's highly stigmatized. That's another conversation. But sugar is causing and wreaking damage. And then in these cases, what they hung their hat on is the knowing weaponization, the knowing misleading of lawmakers and other authorities. That's absolutely, I saw that. We talked about that. It's obviously clear. There's systematic rigging of academic research and civil rights organizations. That's happening with the tobacco, with the sugar companies. So yes, I think that's a free market, totally legitimate way, because what we don't have right now is the right externalities. Right now, a Coke at a store is cheaper than water because the Coke contains ingredients through lobbying and corruption that are subsidized. We actually have Coke cheaper. All I'm asking is that we're clear about the impact of added sugar and not be subsidizing it and recommending it for kids, which we do now, and potentially price in the externalities of this dangerous substance as we do with alcohol, tobacco, other things that are taxed.
Okay. Wow. Oh my God. Now another question, final question before we close up. Have you had any pushback from your whistleblowing status? I mean, you've come out from being an insider and you're speaking quite eloquently about some of the horrors that are being perpetrated and also obviously some suggestions which they don't like. Have you suffered any consequences or do you anticipate that? You're pretty brave.
No, honestly, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I think my message so far, we'll see what happens if I disappear. Please alert the authorities. But my message so far, and it was a little bit
let you disappear. Your voice is too strong.
Okay, thank you.
Important.
I would say this, and again, maybe I'll regret this or second guess this depending on what happens in the future. But I was definitely nervous speaking out. My framework is that, again, going back to business school, I mean, there's a lot of great, smart people in this country and in many countries that are like kind of for various reasons just go on the kind of elite path of working for these pharma companies, I think everyone knows that something's wrong and there's a real fear to speak out. I think we're entering, I think societal change is happening faster than it ever has. I think there's a lot of messy things happening, but we're debating healthcare. We're debating race relations. We're debating gender issues. We're debating transit. Like we're actually as a society, like debating. It's messy, but we're debating and like societal change is happening like at a rapid pace. And, maybe actually some of that long-term is good, even though it's very messy at the time. I think that's happening in every institution. Education system is just totally not letting us down. Healthcare. But I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to speak out. So my message would be, there's been very limited pushback. I think, honestly, I've talked to people at these organizations that I used to work with very high up who are kind of like, gosh, we kind of want things to change.
Wow.
Within the door. Right. And I think I'm not even for like the complete necessarily even elimination of Coke. I mean, Coke is playing within the roadmap that they helped set and is set. I mean, it's a little bit of just nudging and there's public policy, there's societal, but you just kind of got to talk out and push. And that would be my message. I think I have been like happier and calmer than I've been in a long time on this, because it feels good to talk out about this, because I feel very passionate about it. I have a new son. I feel so this would be my answer. I think it's a little bit less scary once you do it. And I know there's a lot of people and a lot of organizations. My sister was terrified leaving medicine after 13 years of training. She didn't know what she was going to do. Now she started a company. She's speaking. She's inspired me a lot. But most doctors, it feels like there's too much to lose to leave. I've met so many doctors who've left the traditional system. I've yet to meet one who's miserable. I think there's so much on the other side, and when I decided to kind of not play the game and, going up the traditional system too, it led to better happiness. So that's my perspective. And I don't know I hope that resonates with maybe some people that are in the system. It's very liberating to speak out.
Well, it sounds liberating, because I can attest to the other side, which is the people that don't speak out are miserable. I think there is another side, and it's actually not so bad. Oh, this is great.
Great point. That's a great point. A lot of people are very depressed who are in the. That's a really good point. Well, thank you.
So what is next for you, Calley?
Yeah. So I'm very passionate about these issues, obviously. And over the past couple of years, has been sold my previous company, which was in the e-commerce space, inspired by my sister, by my mom's experience, the metabolic condition, passing away. I asked, how do I kind of structure and devote my life to this issue, which I define as changing the incentives of healthcare to not be waiting and profiting off people getting sick, but incentivizing people to be healthy. So I started Truemed.com with a great partner, Justin Mayers, who previously started Kettle and Fire Bone Broth and Perfect Keto, two great healthy food companies, leading bone broth brand and a keto brand. And we really bonded over this issue of incentivizing healthy behaviors. And we found this, we think it's a model of health policy, what we're doing, which is enabling these tax advantage accounts to be spent on food, not drugs, basically, which not only prevent disease. Food is often put in this preventative box. It actually is the best reversal for most diseases. If you actually have Alzheimer's or have diabetes or have some cardiovascular issues, it's actually a better reversal than a drug. So we that's what we're doing through the company. What Justin and I are trying to do is build a community, that cares about this, and our customers who are early customers who are using it are using their basically medical spending on food as an act of rebellion. And that's really led to us talking out about this. And we're engaging with legislatures, the press, because we want to move whatever we can do to things forward, and also hopefully be involved with public policy conversations as much as we can to educate, because I think there is a desire to change this. And then the way I got my head around this over the past couple of years, I've been helping my sister, Dr. Calley Means, on a book on metabolic health. Yeah, and it really, that's going to be hopefully next year, and it's a long process. I don't want to give too much away, and we'll have more to say on that. But I will say I think the biggest trend that's low understood is, as you hit on, Doctor, is I think it's arguing that we're going to have a shift. We're going to have a shift from the 42 specialties, the siloed view of health, to a metabolic view of health, and we have to correct ourselves in not seeing the body as siloed. And that's kind of what we're arguing through Casey's experience. We're really excited about that and hope that is impactful.
Well, I'll tell you, if your book is if this is a teaser for that book, I'm ready to buy it. I'm ready to get it.
Okay.
And we'll have to have you and your sister back, but we do have one signature question before we let you go. And that would be, if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about food and or the food industry, what would it be?
Oh man, I'm trying to think about this with my new son.
Right.
Trust your body, not what institutions are telling you. Humans and animals we've domesticated and feed are the only animals that have systematic rates of metabolic dysfunction and obesity. There's not epidemics of obesity among giraffes or lions in the wild. So you were born with this innate, I think, understanding of what's right for us. Children, my young son has a predisposition to natural food and sunlight and movement. I mean, kids can't stop moving. Yeah. And, we immediately addict them to processed food and sit them in a desk and in a windowless room for most of the day. So I think it's just independent thinking and trusting your innate cellular biology that's embedded in us to know what's good for us and kind of not trust the system, frankly. Because I did, like most people my generation have had, I think I probably can trace a lot of, health issues and various mental issues, even to, processed food, 90s food pyramid diet. I think a lot of problems can tie to that if you're really honest.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Calley.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life support group, I'm Sweet Enough. You can subscribe to our show in iTunes or Stitchers. That way you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, which is available on Amazon. If you have any additional questions, both Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals and work one-on-one with clients. You can find their websites and email addresses in the show notes. Be sure to tune in every Friday when our new episodes drop. As Vera loves to say, the power is ours.